All right, so imagine this. You're calling a ride and your app, instead of just showing those little car icons and the closest pickup spots, it actually overlays crime data.
Ooh.
Kind of makes you think, huh, where would you choose to meet your driver?
Yeah.
Well,
Mm.
today we're going deep on a 2020 research study that tackles exactly this, like how our brains make sense of risk, especially when it comes to our personal safety.
And it's not just theoretical. This study, published in Frontiers in Psychology, they actually put people in a simulated scenario.
Okay.
Participants had to choose a rideshare pickup spot from 4 options,
Got it.
each with a different risk level for pedestrian automobile crashes.
Okay, so we've got our virtual riders all set to go.
Exactly.
And now the researchers throw in a curveball.
Wow.
They introduce different types of risk information,
Right.
maps, graphs, tables, all showing those same danger zones, but in different formats.
Right.
So fascinating to see how that impacts the decisions people make.
Yeah, what's really key here is the researchers focus on this dual process approach to risk. It's this idea that we're not just like cold calculating machines, right?
Right.
We've got these 2 systems working simultaneously.
Yeah.
System 1, the fast, emotional, gut feeling part of our brain.
Right, like that instant, nope, don't like the looks of that spot reaction.
Exactly. And then there's system 2, the slower, more analytical side
Okay.
that weighs probabilities and things like that.
So it's not just about avoiding danger.
Right.
It's about finding that sweet spot of perceived safety.
Exactly.
I like that. And what's wild is the study found it wasn't just about steering clear of the riskiest location.
Right.
People actually zeroed in on the spot perceived as the safest
Hmm.
and used that as their benchmark for comparison.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, but
Yeah.
if you think about it, when you're feeling vulnerable, that beacon of safety might be
Yeah.
even more compelling than knowing where not to go.
Yeah.
It's almost like the safest spot kind of anchors our decision-making, even if it's statistically, a minor difference in risk compared to other relatively safe options.
Yeah, it's like, okay, as long as I'm not in the red zone on the map, I'm good,
Mm-hmm.
even if the whole area is statistically a bit riskier overall.
Yeah, that hyper-focus on the immediate situation is fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
It suggests that when we're making these quick decisions under pressure, our brains might prioritize that feeling of localized safety
Yeah,
over these broader statistical trends.
right.
Almost like, if this corner seems okay, I'm not going to worry about the citywide average.
Mhm. And that leads us right into the study's findings about how different visuals affected choices.
Right.
So they tested 9 different ways to show the risk data,
Wow.
from numbers and tables to various kinds of graphs and maps.
Okay.
And what surprised me is that most formats didn't actually cause these huge differences in how people process the information. It's
Huh.
like our brains are able to translate those different visuals into a relatively consistent understanding of, okay, this is the risk.
Right. You'd think a pie chart would feel different than, say, a bar graph. But it seems like our brains are pretty adaptable when it comes to extracting that core message about risk.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the risky spot.
Totally, except there was one format that really stood out from the pack. Wasn't there.
Indeed.
Yeah.
The color-coded hotspot maps on a satellite image.
Mm-hmm.
Remember those?
Oh, yeah.
Big red blobs for high-risk, cooler colors for safer spots.
Right.
Participants using those maps were much quicker to identify and dismiss those high-risk areas,
Yeah.
especially those 3 spots with higher crash rates.
It's like our brain goes, big red blob. Nope, not going there.
Yeah.
But why were those maps so much more effective?
The researchers believe it comes down to that combination of visual clarity and realistic context. Those bright red hotspots just jump out at you.
Yeah.
And that satellite image provides this real-world backdrop that our brains can instantly connect with. It's like you're looking at a snapshot of the actual environment and can immediately grasp where the danger zones are,
Mm-hmm.
almost like that primal instinct, to avoid a predator in the wild.
Yeah, but here's the kicker. Even when given additional context about citywide crash rates, people's choices didn't budge. They stuck with their initial rankings based on that immediate localized view.
Yeah.
Wild.
It really speaks volumes about how we perceive and react to risk information. That broader data, even though it was relevant to their overall safety, didn't change their perception of which specific spot felt safest in the moment.
Right.
Fascinating.
So we've got this tug of war between these two systems in our brain.
Yeah.
And it seems like visuals, especially realistic ones, can really tip the scales.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, are the maps we use every day really designed with this in mind?
Yeah. That's a question worth exploring. And
Mm.
speaking of how our brains process risk,
Mm-hmm.
there's another layer to this study that I think will really make you think. Remember how the researchers tested those 9 different ways to present the risk data? Well, they found something really interesting when it came to the least effective format.
Oh, yeah, those thematic maps with the grayscale shading.
Yeah.
Yeah, just different shades of gray to represent like varying risk levels.
Yeah.
You'd think that would be pretty clear cut.
You would think so, but they were actually the least effective,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it came to people's perceptions of the safest pickup spot.
Interesting.
It seemed to create more confusion than clarity.
That's so counterintuitive. Why would grayscale be so tricky?
Well, the researchers think it might have to do with visual contrast,
Okay.
or rather, the lack of it.
Okay.
Those grayscale shades, especially against the backdrop of a satellite image, just weren't distinct enough.
Got it.
And that lack of visual distinction might have actually fueled uncertainty and negative feelings,
Oh, wow.
even towards the safest choice.
So even though the safest spot was technically safer,
Right.
the way it was presented on the map made people second-guess themselves.
Exactly. It seems like our brains crave that visual reassurance,
Yeah,
especially when dealing with something as primal as safety.
right.
We want to see that safe zone clearly demarcated,
Right.
not blended into the background with these subtle shades of gray.
This whole conversation is really making me rethink how we design maps and present risk information in general.
Yeah.
It's not just about the data itself.
Right.
It's about how our brains perceive and react to that data visually.
Absolutely. And speaking of reactions, there's another fascinating layer to this study that I think we haven't touched on yet, the role of emotions.
Right. We talked about that dual process model,
Right.
with system 1 being all about those gut feelings. But I'm curious, how did the researchers actually measure those emotional responses in the study?
They used a measure called negative affect, which essentially gauged the participants' feelings of worry, uncertainty, and fear about each pickup spot.
Oh, okay.
So they asked things like, would you be worried to walk to this pickup point?
Got it.
Or, does this location evoke negative feelings in general?
So even if the data said a spot was statistically safe, if it felt creepy or unsafe,
Yeah,
that emotional response could still override the logic.
that's exactly what they found.
Yeah.
Higher negative effect toward a location, regardless of its actual risk level, significantly decreased the likelihood of someone choosing that spot.
Wow.
It really underscores how powerful our emotional responses to risk can be.
Yeah.
They can sometimes hijack even the most logical, data-driven assessments.
It's like maybe the safest spot is right next to a dimly lit alleyway.
Right.
Logically, it might be fine,
Right.
but those gut feelings kick in and suddenly it doesn't feel safe anymore.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of not just presenting cold, hard data,
Right.
but also understanding and addressing those emotional responses.
Mm.
Because in the real world, those feelings, those gut reactions often drive our decisions,
Right.
even when we think we're being logical.
It's like that saying, we make decisions emotionally and then justify them rationally.
Right.
This study really puts that into perspective.
For sure.
So we've got these two systems in our brain, visual cues impacting our perceptions,
Yeah.
and emotions potentially overriding logic. What does this all mean for us? How can we actually use this knowledge to navigate risk in our own lives? It's almost like we need like a whole new approach to how we design maps and communicate risk.
Yeah.
Something that takes into account not just the data,
Right.
but also how our brains are actually wired to react.
I think you've hit on something really important.
Yeah.
Imagine if instead of just showing us those danger zones, maps were designed to highlight those safe zones.
Right.
Like think about your navigation app.
Uh-huh.
What if instead of simply showing you the fastest route, it also highlighted routes known for, good lighting visibility
Right. Yeah.
and lower crime rates?
Yeah, it's like flipping the script on how we think about risk.
Exactly.
Instead of focusing on where to avoid, we're drawn towards areas of perceived safety.
Right.
Kind of like those blue zones they talk about with longevity.
Right.
They don't focus on what makes people sick. They highlight the factors that contribute to a long, healthy life.
Exactly. And it goes beyond navigation apps, too.
Yeah.
Think about crime reports.
Yeah.
What if they emphasize those safe corridors and low-risk areas
Right.
instead of just showing those clusters of crime?
Right.
It could potentially influence people's decisions about where they walk, where they bike, or
Yeah.
even choose to live.
It could be huge, especially for people who are new to a city or maybe those who might feel a little bit more vulnerable.
Yeah,
Instead of being overwhelmed by a sea of red dots on a crime map, they're guided towards areas where they can feel more secure.
absolutely. And imagine the possibilities for city planning and design.
Right.
What if street lighting crosswalks,
Oh.
even the placement of those rideshare pickup spots, were strategically designed
Right.
to minimize risk and kind of guide people towards safer choices?
Yeah, it's like designing the world with our brain's risk processing in mind,
Exactly.
creating an environment where safety is woven into the very fabric of our surroundings.
Precisely. And this kind of thinking could extend to all sorts of risk communication.
Right.
Think about weather warnings.
Yeah.
What if those maps not only showed you the storm's path,
Uh-huh.
but they also highlighted historically less congested evacuation routes
Right.
or areas less prone to flooding?
That would be so helpful in those high-pressure moments when you need to make a quick decision,
Yeah.
instead of just reacting to the threat you're presented with options that lead you towards safety.
This research really underscores the power of understanding this interplay between data, visuals, and emotions.
Right.
By designing systems that tap into how our brains naturally respond to risk,
Yeah.
we can potentially empower people to make safer, more informed choices.
It's been a fascinating deep dive, to say the least.
It has.
It's amazing how much complexity lies beneath the surface of something as seemingly simple as looking at a map or just choosing a pickup spot.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we're not always as rational as we think we are.
Right.
Our emotions, our gut feelings really play a powerful role in how we perceive and respond to risk.
Totally.
Too.
But by understanding those mechanisms, we can potentially design a world where those choices become more intuitive, more informed, and ultimately safer for everyone.
Absolutely. So the next time you're checking the weather, navigating a new city, or even just calling a ride, take a moment to consider how those maps and the information they present are influencing your decisions.
Yeah.
It might just change how you view the world and the choices you make within it.